Flight crew mocks quiet passenger, then panic hits and he reveals he's the pilot who saves the day. The airport was busy, as usual. People rushed through security lines, dragging bags, calling out to family, checking departure screens. In the middle of it all walked Kevin, calm, dressed sharp in a navy suit, a small leather bag in hand. He wasn't trying to stand out, but somehow he did. Maybe it was his quiet confidence. Maybe it was the way he walked, like someone who'd been in this place many times before. He reached the first-class check-in counter and offered a polite smile to the flight attendant standing there. She looked at him, blinked once, and tilted her head, almost like she was trying to figure out if he was lost. Her smile never came. Instead, she glanced down at his boarding pass and raised a brow. "Sir, are you sure this is the right line? Economy is that way," she said, pointing vaguely toward the crowd behind him. Kevin didn't flinch. He just held out the pass. "Yes, this is the right line," he said, his voice steady. She took the ticket, eyes scanning it. For a split second, her face changed. Surprise? Discomfort? But it quickly turned cold again. "All right then, enjoy your flight," she said, but her tone didn't match the words. As he walked past, he heard her murmur under her breath, "Guess they let anyone up here these days." Kevin paused for a second. Not long, not enough to cause a scene, but just long enough to feel the weight of those words. Still, he didn't turn back. He just moved on, down the jet bridge, quiet and composed. This wasn't new to him. That didn't make it right, but it made it familiar. Inside the plane, the first-class cabin was already half full. Passengers were sipping drinks, flipping through magazines, settling in. Kevin found his seat, window, second row, and carefully placed his bag overhead. He sat down, took a slow breath, and leaned back. The seat was soft, the lights were low, the scent of coffee and jet fuel lingered in the air. He let his eyes close for a moment. This was supposed to be a peaceful flight. Nothing more. But peace doesn't always come easy. As more passengers boarded, Kevin noticed one of the flight attendants walking up the aisle. It was the same one from the gate. Her posture was upright, her expression polite, at least when she spoke to others. She laughed softly while handing water to a couple in the row across from him, asked about their trip, made them smile. Then she reached Kevin. No smile now, no greeting. Just a plastic cup of water dropped onto his tray without a word. Some of it spilled. She didn't even say sorry. Kevin looked up, met her eyes, and gave a calm, quiet, "Thank you." She didn't respond, just turned and moved on. Kevin sat still. A few passengers glanced over. Some looked uncomfortable. No one said anything. He'd seen this kind of thing before. Being questioned, looked down on, doubted, judged by appearance first, and ability. Never. What no one knew, not the flight crew, not the other passengers, was that Kevin was no ordinary flyer. He wasn't just here for the legroom or the meal. In his bag, tucked behind a notebook, was a card. Worn, laminated, and powerful. A commercial pilot's license. He had thousands of hours in the sky, years of training, countless checklists, takeoffs, landings, long nights, early mornings. He'd flown through thunderstorms and landed on snowy runways. He'd calmed passengers during turbulence and navigated crosswinds with ease. Flying wasn't just his job, it was who he was. But today, he had booked a seat as a passenger, to rest, to think, to disappear into the background, if only for a few hours. The people around him saw a quiet man in a nice suit. The flight attendant saw someone who didn't look like first class. What they didn't see was everything else. The skill, the experience, the calm under pressure. The man who, if the unthinkable ever happened, would be exactly the person they'd pray to have on board. And soon, they'd find that out. Because this wasn't going to be just another flight. This plane wasn't just carrying passengers. It was carrying a story no one would forget. And before it was over, the very crew who judged him would be looking to Kevin to save them all. The plane had been in the air for a little over 30 minutes. The seatbelt sign was off, and the soft murmur of conversation filled the cabin. Somewhere in the distance, a baby cried faintly, and an overhead compartment clicked shut. But Kevin barely noticed. He stared out the window, watching clouds pass slowly below, his hands resting on his lap. The sky felt peaceful. The cabin didn't. He could feel it. The stares. The subtle discomfort. People weren't saying anything, but they didn't need to. The flight attendant from earlier, the same one who questioned him at the gate, was now doing drink service. She smiled brightly at an elderly couple across the aisle. "Would you like red or white wine?" she asked with warmth in her voice. They laughed. She laughed with them. But the moment she turned to Kevin, the air around her changed. Her eyes narrowed just slightly. Her smile faded. She didn't say a word. Instead, she dropped a napkin onto his tray, followed by a plastic cup of water again. No eye contact. No, sir. No, "Would you like anything else?" And then, she moved on. A few droplets of water had spilled onto the napkin. Kevin slowly picked up the cup and sipped without flinching. But inside, something burned. Not anger, not surprise, just exhaustion. A quiet, steady kind of hurt that comes from being treated as less than when you've worked your entire life to be more. Across the aisle, the elderly woman who had laughed with the flight attendant moments ago suddenly frowned. She leaned over to her husband and whispered, "Did you see how she treated that gentleman? So rude." Her husband nodded, lips pressed in a tight line. Further down, another member of the crew, a younger male attendant with kind eyes, had been watching. He hesitated. His lips parted, like he might say something, but then he turned back toward the galley. Silence, once again, was the easy choice. Kevin took another sip and leaned back, letting his head rest gently against the seat. This wasn't the first time. Not by far. He remembered being a young pilot in training, the double takes in the briefing room, the assumptions that he must be the intern or a baggage handler. He remembered interviews where the questions felt different, the tone more skeptical, the compliments thinner. But he had made it, despite it all. Still, it hurt that in moments like this, where no one knew who he was, it always came back around. People made up their minds about him before he said a word. The plane rocked slightly, just a light bounce of turbulence. A few passengers gripped their armrests. Kevin didn't move. His body knew the rhythm of air pockets. His eyes flicked toward the ceiling panel. He noticed the angle of the wings out the window. Everything still seemed normal. For now. As the cart rolled past, Kevin glanced up again. This time, the younger crew member slowed down near his seat. "Is there anything else I can get you, sir?" he asked quietly, his voice low, careful. Kevin shook his head with a small smile. "No, thank you. I appreciate it." The attendant gave him a nod and walked away, but not before glancing back at the other flight attendant, who had clearly noticed the interaction. She didn't say anything, but her jaw was tight. Her eyes didn't hold that same spark they had when she greeted others. In the rows ahead, a young woman pulled out her phone and began discreetly recording. She hadn't missed how Kevin was being treated. Her thumbs moved quickly over the screen, likely sharing what she'd seen. Whispered conversations stirred between a few more passengers. The energy was shifting. The truth was, people noticed. They just didn't always speak. Up until someone did. A businessman sitting in the front row turned to the aisle and caught the younger crew member's attention. "Hey," he said, loud enough for a few others to hear. "What's going on with your colleague? She's treating that man back there like he doesn't belong here. We all see it." The young crew member's eyes widened. He looked between the passenger and the galley, unsure what to say. But the words had already been spoken. People were listening now. Back in his seat, Kevin didn't react. He simply took another breath and folded his napkin quietly, his fingers steady. He hadn't asked for anyone to speak up, but part of him felt something shift inside, like maybe this time he wasn't going to be alone in it. Moments later, the flight attendant returned. She stopped by Kevin's row again. Her voice was clipped. "More water?" she asked, still not meeting his eyes. Kevin looked up and met her gaze, calm, still polite. "Yes, please," he said. Then softly he added, "Thank you, by name." That simple moment, her name, spoken with grace, hit her harder than she expected. Her eyes flickered. She poured the water and moved on without a word. Passengers watched her go. Whispers followed her down the aisle. Kevin didn't need an apology. He didn't need to argue. He didn't need to prove himself. Because sometimes, silence and composure say more than 1,000 words. But fate had more in store for that flight. And very soon, everyone on board, including the one who doubted him, would find themselves depending on the quiet man in seat 2A. And they would learn who he really was. Not because he said it, but because when the sky turned dangerous, he would be the only one calm enough to take control. The plane kept cruising smoothly through the sky, but something in the air didn't feel quite right anymore. The tension wasn't just from earlier interactions, it was deeper now, uneasy, like a silent warning no one could put into words yet. Kevin looked out the window again, clear skies, no sign of storms. But his instincts, sharpened by years in the cockpit, whispered that something was off. And then it happened. The plane gave a sudden, sharp jolt, not the usual kind of turbulence. This one made drinks spill, trays rattle, and passengers gasp. In surprise, Kevin's grip instinctively tightened on the armrest, his mind snapping into a place it hadn't been in months. Alert mode. A second lurch came, stronger. The overhead compartments rattled loudly this time. A few startled cries echoed from the back. The seatbelt sign dinged on with a loud ding as the captain's voice tried to cut through the growing tension. "Ladies and gentlemen, we've hit a bit of unexpected turbulence. Please return to your seats and fasten seatbelts immediately. Thank you." The voice didn't sound calm. It sounded tight, rushed. Kevin knew that tone. It was the voice of someone trying to sound in control, when things weren't. From the corner of his eye, he noticed one of the attendants briskly walking down the aisle, whispering something to her colleague with a pale face. She looked genuinely frightened, not panicked, but not far from it. Kevin stayed seated, watching. A few moments later, a co-pilot stepped out of the cockpit, alone. He didn't look around or smile like they sometimes did during bathroom breaks. He went straight to the galley, where 3 crew members gathered around him in a tight huddle. Kevin couldn't hear all of it, but parts of it reached his ears. He collapsed during descent check. He's unresponsive. "I don't know how much longer I can keep it steady." Kevin's eyes narrowed. His heartbeat didn't race, but his focus sharpened. Every muscle in his body shifted, from passenger to pilot, even though he hadn't moved yet. The plane dipped again, not dangerously, but noticeably. Gasps followed. A baby cried louder this time. Somewhere, someone muttered a prayer under their breath. Kevin undid his seatbelt quietly. No drama, no grand gestures, just calm intention. He stood and stepped into the aisle, walking toward the galley with a steady pace. A few passengers turned their heads, confused. One whispered, "What's he doing?" He reached the group of flight attendants and spoke in a voice firm but kind. "I overheard. I'm a commercial pilot. I can help." All three turned to him. The co-pilot looked exhausted, his forehead shining with sweat. He blinked, taken aback. "You're... what?" "I've flown for over a decade," Kevin said simply. "Large, aircraft, commercial routes. I can assist if needed." The younger male attendant, who had shown Kevin kindness earlier, nodded quickly. "He's telling the truth. I believe him." But the woman who had been cold to Kevin from the start? She stepped forward, arms crossed. "You're a pilot?" she said, her voice laced with disbelief. "And we're supposed to just take your word for it?" Kevin didn't argue. He didn't get angry. He reached into the side of his bag and pulled out the one thing that needed no explanation, a laminated pilot's license. The co-pilot snatched it, eyes scanning the information. Then he looked up, relief washing over his face. "Thank God," he whispered. "Come with me, please." They moved quickly toward the cockpit. The woman who had questioned Kevin stood still, stunned. She watched as he walked past her, not with pride, not with payback in his eyes, but with quiet urgency. This wasn't about proving anything. This was about saving lives. As Kevin reached the cockpit, the murmurs in the cabin grew louder. Passengers leaned out of their seats. Some stood up slightly, trying to get a better look. Is something wrong? Who's that guy? What's going on? The businessman who had spoken up earlier shook his head slowly and said, loud enough for others to hear, "That's the guy they treated like he didn't belong in first class. Turns out, he might be the only reason we all get home safe." Back, in the cockpit, the scene was tense. Warning lights flashed on the control panels. The captain was slumped in his seat, unconscious. Oxygen mask over his face. The co-pilot sat hunched over, hands shaking as he tried to keep the aircraft stable. Kevin slid into the empty seat beside him and took over like he'd done it 100 times before because he had. "All right," Kevin said calmly. "Let's stabilize first. What's your last check-in with ATC?" The co-pilot glanced over, already beginning to breathe easier. "We're en route to Newark. ATC knows we may request an emergency landing." Kevin nodded. "Then we're doing just that." Behind them, the world didn't know yet that everything had changed, that the man they doubted, the one judged by appearances, had just become the pilot in charge. And the rest of this flight? It was now in Kevin's hands, and the sky was watching. The cockpit was tense. No music, no chatter, just the quiet hum of electronics and the distant rush of air outside. Warning lights blinked steadily. The co-pilot sat stiffly, shoulders high, eyes flicking from one screen to another. He was holding it together, but barely. Kevin didn't waste time. His hands moved quickly across the instrument panel, checking altitude, fuel levels, autopilot settings. His voice was calm but clear. "Let's stabilize first. We'll keep her level, then plan a direct descent into Newark." The co-pilot nodded, a little breathless. "I've never dealt with this alone before." "You're not alone now," Kevin said. "We've got this." Back in the cabin, people were starting to put the pieces together. They'd seen Kevin step forward. They'd seen him disappear into the cockpit with the crew. Something was wrong. The turbulence wasn't just turbulence. A quiet panic started to rise. One woman clutched her phone, fingers trembling. "Is he really a pilot?" The elderly couple from earlier spoke up. "Yes," the woman said firmly. "We heard him. He's the real deal." The younger flight attendant, still shaken, moved down the aisle trying to stay composed. His voice trembled slightly as he addressed the passengers. "Ladies and gentlemen, we've experienced a medical emergency with our captain, but we do have an experienced pilot on board who has stepped in to assist. Please remain calm and stay in your seats. We're working with air traffic control now to make a safe landing." A ripple of reaction spread across the rows. Some people gasped, others exchanged glances. But more than anything, there was hope. Someone was in control. And Kevin? He was right where he belonged, "Okay," he said, adjusting the throttle slightly. "Let's contact ATC and request emergency clearance." The co-pilot turned to the radio, voice steadier now. "Newark Center, this is Flight 237, declaring a medical emergency. We've had incapacitation of our captain. A qualified pilot, one of our passengers, is in control, requesting emergency. Landing clearance." There was a pause, then the reply. "Flight 237, roger that. You are cleared direct to Newark Liberty International. Emergency services are standing by. Winds 10 knots northeast. Runway 4R in use." Kevin acknowledged and began to guide the aircraft into a gentle course correction. The plane, which had been jolting and dipping minutes earlier, now began to glide with more control. The turbulence lessened. The rumbling steadied. The co-pilot looked over at Kevin, eyes wide. "You're amazing." Kevin didn't respond with pride, just a slight nod. "Focus. Let's work through this checklist together." Meanwhile, the flight attendants were preparing the cabin. Seatbacks were upright. Trays were locked. One of the crew members, still clearly shaken, moved to Kevin's original seat in first class, retrieving the bag he'd brought on board. She opened it, probably looking for ID. Instead, she found flight manuals, training logs, a headset, and a worn photo of Kevin in his early days, smiling in uniform, standing in front of a jet. It was real. All of it. And the one who had doubted him the most? She stood at the front of the cabin now, gripping the armrest, staring toward the cockpit door. Her face was pale. Her earlier smugness had vanished. What replaced it was something that looked a lot like shame. Back in the sky, the city lights began to appear in the distance. Kevin checked the instruments again. The approach path was clear. Weather conditions were manageable, but every second still mattered. He turned to the co-pilot. "We'll do a soft descent. Let's brief the cabin for emergency landing procedures just in case." The younger man nodded quickly, reaching for the intercom. "This is your co-pilot." Again, his voice came through the speakers, steadier now. "We are making an emergency landing at Newark Liberty due to a medical issue. The situation is under control. Please follow all instructions from the cabin crew. Seatbelts on. Remain calm." In the cabin, it got quiet. Really quiet. Heads bowed, hands held. A few whispered prayers floated in the air. Kevin adjusted their altitude again, lowering the flaps. The wheels would be down soon. Everything had to be perfect. Because hundreds of people were trusting him. People who hadn't even looked at him twice when he first boarded. People who might have judged him, doubted him. Now, they had no choice but to believe. The runway was visible now, long, glowing, steady. "Landing gear," Kevin called. "Down and locked," the co-pilot replied. Kevin's eyes never left the horizon. He spoke into the radio one last time. "Newark Tower, Flight 237, final, approach. Emergency team on standby?" "Affirmative, 237. Emergency services are in place. You're clear to land." Kevin gave a small nod. "Copy. We're coming in." The aircraft glided lower, the wheels nearly kissing the ground. The hum of the engines softened. Passengers held their breath. 20 feet, 10, and then touchdown. Smooth, controlled, safe. The cabin exploded into applause. Kevin guided the aircraft gently to a stop near emergency vehicles already waiting. Lights flashed outside, but inside, it was calm. He took one breath, just one. And for the first time that entire flight, Kevin allowed himself to exhale. He had done it. Not to prove them wrong, but because he knew it was what he was meant to do. And the flight? It wasn't just saved. It had changed everything. The wheels had barely cooled from touchdown, but the applause in the cabin hadn't stopped. People were clapping, crying, holding hands, looking around in disbelief. Some whispered prayers of thanks. Others just sat still, stunned by what had just happened. Kevin sat in the cockpit for a moment longer, staring out at the blinking runway lights. He didn't smile, he didn't speak. He just sat with the silence, the kind that comes after something big, after something you don't quite have words for yet. Beside him, the young co-pilot turned to him slowly. His eyes were glassy. "I don't even know what to say," he whispered. Kevin finally looked at him and gave a gentle nod. "You stayed. Calm. That's what matters. You did your part." The co-pilot reached out and shook Kevin's hand, holding it firmly. "No, you saved us." Outside, emergency personnel were already boarding. Paramedics moved quickly and quietly toward the unconscious captain. A medical crew took over with practiced hands, lifting him onto a stretcher. They spoke in hushed voices, respectful and focused. Kevin watched as the man was wheeled out of the cockpit, wondering if he'd be okay. And then, it was time. Kevin stepped out of the cockpit and into the cabin. He wasn't ready for what was waiting. The entire front half of the plane had turned toward him. Passengers were standing in the aisles clapping again. A few had tears running down their cheeks. Others just stared, mouths parted, as if they couldn't believe the same quiet man who'd boarded earlier was now the reason they were still alive. One woman reached out and grabbed Kevin's hand as he passed. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for not walking away, even after how they treated you." Kevin gave her hand a gentle squeeze but didn't stop walking. He wasn't doing this for recognition. Then he saw her. The flight attendant who had questioned him from the very beginning stood near the galley. She looked different now. Her posture wasn't proud anymore. Her hands were clasped together, tightly in front of her. Her eyes were red, her face pale. When their eyes met, she flinched, just slightly. She stepped forward, her voice barely audible. I don't even know where to begin," she said. "The way I treated you? The things I assumed? I was wrong. I was so wrong." Kevin paused. The cabin was quiet now. Every ear was turned toward them. Even the passengers in the back had hushed, straining to hear. Kevin didn't raise his voice. He didn't look angry. He looked steady, strong, like someone who had carried this weight before. "Thank you for saying that," he said quietly. "But this isn't just about me. What happened here today happens to people all the time, every day. Maybe not on a plane, but in offices, stores, classrooms. People get judged before they're known, and it hurts." She looked down, nodding slowly. "I see that now." Kevin glanced around the cabin. "But it's not too late to do better," he added. "To notice our own biases and change them, that's what matters." The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was heavy with thought, with reflection, with a new kind of awareness. Just then, a voice came from behind him, the businessman who had earlier questioned the crew's behavior. He stepped forward, holding up his phone. "I recorded part of what happened," he said. "Not to go viral, but to make sure this moment doesn't get brushed under the rug." Others nodded. The young woman who had secretly filmed earlier stood up too. "People need to see the whole story," she said. "What happened to you was wrong, but what you did? That was incredible." Kevin didn't say much more. He just nodded and stepped aside so people could begin exiting the aircraft. One by one, the passengers passed him. Some thanked him with handshakes. Others gave him quiet nods of respect. A young boy clung to his mother's hand, pointing at Kevin and whispering, "Is he a superhero?" His mom smiled. "Yes, baby, in real life." As the plane emptied out, Kevin was the last one to leave. He stood for a moment in the middle of the cabin, now quiet and still. He ran a hand along the back of a seat, not because it meant anything, just because it helped him come back to the moment. At the gate, airline officials were waiting. A senior manager, wearing a sharp suit and a serious expression, stepped forward, hand extended. "Mr. Johnson," he said, "on behalf of the entire airline, thank you. What you did today? It was beyond heroic. You prevented what could have been a tragedy." Kevin shook his hand. "I did what needed to be done." The manager nodded. "I'd like to speak with you further. We have a lot to talk about, including what we need to fix." Kevin gave a tired but firm nod. "I'm open to that conversation." Behind them, reporters had begun to gather. Word was spreading. Cameras clicked. People whispered. But Kevin didn't care about headlines. He cared that everyone on that plane got to go home. That maybe now, they'd see the world a little differently. And that sometimes, one person standing tall, quietly, calmly, can shake something loose in the hearts of many. And this was only the beginning. Outside the terminal, the night air was cooler than expected. Kevin stepped out, his bag over his shoulder, still wearing the same quiet expression he'd carried throughout the flight. Behind him, the plane was surrounded, flashing lights from emergency crews, airline staff, and reporters clustered by the exit ramp. But Kevin moved past it all like a man walking out of a storm. He just wanted air, space, a moment to breathe. Then from behind, someone called his name. "Mr. Johnson!" Kevin turned. It was the airline manager from earlier, now, flanked by a group of executives in crisp uniforms and sharp suits. The woman in the center, older with silver streaks in her hair, stepped forward. "I'm Amanda Reeves," she said. "CEO of the airline. I've heard everything, and I'd like a word if you have a moment." Kevin looked at her for a second, reading her expression. She wasn't just here for a photo op. There was something in her eyes. Respect, maybe, or regret. They sat inside a quiet office off the terminal, away from cameras. No reporters, just people, finally ready to talk like humans. "We owe you our deepest thanks," Amanda began. "And an apology." Kevin nodded but said nothing yet. She continued, choosing her words carefully. "We've reviewed the reports. We've seen video footage. It's clear that the way you were treated, before and during the flight, was unacceptable. Not only unprofessional, but discriminatory." There it was. Finally. Someone saying it. Out loud. Kevin still didn't say much. He didn't need to. Sometimes silence speaks loudest. Amanda looked him in the eye. "We'd like to offer you a permanent senior pilot position, plus a new role, a leadership post to help us change our culture. Diversity, inclusion, training, hiring. We need voices like yours guiding us." Kevin leaned back slightly. The offer was generous, unexpected, but he didn't jump to accept. "I appreciate the offer," he said quietly. "But what matters most isn't titles. It's that this moment becomes more than just a headline. It has to mean something." Amanda nodded. "Agreed. We're already drafting policy changes. We'll be starting company-wide training, auditing promotion practices, and bringing in external consultants to monitor bias in how we operate. But we also want you involved, even in an advisory role, if you're willing." Kevin paused, then nodded slowly. "Then let's start with a conversation, a real one, and not just with you, but with your staff." As the meeting wrapped up, Amanda gestured toward a group outside the office. It was the cabin crew from the Flight -1. The younger male attendant was there, the one who had quietly supported Kevin from the beginning. He looked nervous but relieved. "Sir, I want to say thank you for not just what you did up there, but for how you carried yourself. I should have spoken up sooner." Kevin offered a small smile. "It's not easy, but you saw it, and you tried. That matters." Next to him stood the elderly couple who'd flown in first class. They came not with cameras, but with handwritten letters, one for Kevin, one for the airline. "We wanted you to have this," the woman said. "People like you remind us the world's still good." But the most unexpected face stood behind them all. the flight attendant. She didn't look like the woman from the gate anymore. She looked smaller now, less sure. Her hair was messy, her eyes puffy. She stepped forward hesitantly, holding nothing in her hands. "I know I don't deserve a second of your time," she began, her voice trembling. "But I've been thinking about what I did, what I said. I've been thinking about how fast I judged you, and how deeply I failed." Kevin looked at her, really looked at her. She continued, her voice cracking. "I'm not here to make excuses. I wanted you to know I see it now, and I'm going to spend a long time making it right." Kevin was quiet for a long moment. He wasn't angry. He wasn't trying to shame her. He just let her stand in it. Let her be human. "You don't need to prove it to me," he finally said. "You need to prove it to yourself, and to the next person you serve. Every flight, every time." She nodded slowly, tears falling freely now. Behind her, the young woman who had secretly recorded the flight posted a final update online. "He didn't just land the plane, he landed a lesson, one we all needed." Within hours, the story had spread far beyond aviation. News outlets, blogs, podcasts, everyone was talking about it. But Kevin didn't care about trending. He cared that people might think twice before assuming. That somewhere, a young black boy dreaming of becoming a pilot might see his story and believe he belongs. That a girl told people like her don't fly planes might hear his name and whisper, "Why not me?" And that one day, stories like his wouldn't feel rare. They'd just feel right. Back at his hotel room, Kevin's phone buzzed. A text from his wife. "Just saw the news. Maya keeps pointing at the TV saying, 'That's my dad. He's a real-life hero.'" Kevin sat down on the edge of the bed, staring out the window at the lights of Newark glowing below. He smiled, tired but full. This journey had started with judgment. But now it was headed somewhere much, much higher, and the landing was just the beginning. 5 years passed, but what happened on that flight never faded. For Kevin, it didn't end when the wheels touched down or when the applause stopped echoing in the cabin. That moment had become something bigger, something that followed him everywhere, quietly reshaping his life and the lives of so many others. He kept flying, of course. He was still a pilot first. But now, between flights, he worked closely with the airline's diversity and inclusion team, helping reshape the culture from the inside. Not with buzzwords or checklists, but with stories, with truth, with empathy. He shared his experience in training sessions, stood in classrooms, and spoke on panels. He didn't speak with anger. He spoke with purpose. And people listened. Airline hiring practices changed. So did promotion paths. So did the conversations happening behind closed doors. It wasn't perfect, change never is. But something real had begun. And Kevin was at the heart of it. Then one day, a message came to his inbox. Short, simple. "Captain Johnson, would you consider speaking at our scholarship launch for aspiring pilots from underrepresented backgrounds? You helped make this possible. We'd be honored to have you welcome the first class." Kevin replied the same day. "I wouldn't miss it." The event took place at Newark Liberty International, the same airport where everything had changed. But this time, the energy was different. There was no fear in the air, no judgment, just promise, excitement, new beginnings. Kevin stood near a terminal gate watching a group of about 20 young people, some still teens, others in their early 20s, gather in nervous little clusters. They wore matching flight school jackets and wide-eyed expressions. Some clutched notebooks. Others whispered excitedly, pointing at the parked training jet outside. He saw himself in all of them, not just in the ambition, but in the quiet question behind their eyes. Do I belong here? Kevin stepped forward, hands in his pockets, a calm smile on his face. "You do," he said aloud, meeting each of their gazes. "You absolutely do." The room quieted. Phones were tucked away. Attention shifted fully toward him. "You're going to face moments where someone doubts you," he said. "Where someone says something that makes you question whether you're in the right place. And when that happens, remember this. You don't have to be loud to be strong. You don't have to prove yourself to people who don't know your worth. You just have to keep showing up, again and again." The group was silent, focused. Until one young woman raised her hand. She looked nervous but determined. "Sir, did you ever want to give up?" Kevin smiled gently. "More times than I can count. But every time I thought about walking away, I remembered the people coming up behind me. The ones who needed to see someone like them in the cockpit. That kept me going. And now, you'll do the same." As applause filled the space, Kevin noticed a familiar face standing quietly at the back of the room. She looked different now. No uniform, no air of authority, just humble posture, a soft smile, and eyes that had clearly traveled far in 5 years. It was the same flight attendant who once asked him if he was in the wrong line. She waited until the students had moved toward the plane before stepping forward. "Mr. Johnson," she said softly, "thank you for letting me come today. I didn't expect you to say yes." Kevin nodded. "You asked with honesty. That matters." She glanced toward the young pilots boarding the training flight. "I tell your story in every workshop I lead. Now, not to excuse what I did, but to make sure it's not repeated. I want them to know what it feels like to make a wrong assumption and what it means to unlearn it." Kevin studied her face for a moment, then nodded. "Then keep telling it. Not as a shame story, but as a growth one." They stood in silence for a moment, watching the group settle into the aircraft. One girl in the front row waved through the window at Kevin before pulling on her headset. He waved back. As the engines roared to life, Kevin stepped aside, letting the next generation take the runway. The plane taxied down the tarmac, lifted off the ground, and climbed smoothly into the sky, just like they would one day. Kevin turned and walked toward the exit, the hum of jet engines behind him. His phone buzzed with a message from his daughter. Maya, now 15. "Dad, I'm writing a speech for school about heroes. Can I write it about you?" Kevin stopped walking, heart softening. He replied, "Only if you end it with this. Real heroes don't ask for attention. They just show up when it counts." As he stepped out into the fresh air, he looked up at the open sky. Planes crossed silently above him, leaving behind faint trails of white across the blue. He smiled. This wasn't just the end of a story, it was proof. That quiet strength can be louder than hate. That dignity can rewrite judgment. And that one man, treated like he didn't belong, could change the course of hundreds of lives simply by doing what he was born to do. Fly, lead, and lift others with him.